Tonight, debating Alberta's future, the leaders of the UCP and the NDP clash on stage.
The reason she doesn't want to run on her record is it was an absolute disaster.
Why are you not being honest with Albertans?
Plus, the intense campaigns for crucial seats in Battleground Calgary. Hours away from a potential strike, some WestJet flights are already cancelled.
It's the small customers who they rely on that are really feeling the brunt.
A healthcare staffing crunch and a provincial licensing exam under scrutiny.
The exam is not testing what it should be testing.
How Quebec has failed its would-be nurses.
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
The economy, health care, and leadership. A packed agenda tonight in a heated televised debate in Edmonton. The two-party leaders fighting to become Alberta's next premier head to head. On one side, Danielle Smith, the leader of the United Conservative Party and the incumbent. Across the stage, Rachel Notley. She's the leader of the Alberta NDP and held the role of premier from 2015 to 2019. So Julia Wong joins us now from Edmonton. Julia, this race obviously very tight. What's the tone like between the candidates?
Well, Adrian, to be frank, it got a little feisty during this debate, and it really was during the free debate when the leaders had a chance to go toe-to-toe with one another that you could see that come out. While they were trying to be cordial, they were also honing in on the others' past records, on the others' past comments. During the affordability section, there were questions about the cost of utilities. Check out this exchange that happened when the issue of carbon neutrality came up.
We have to fight back against Ottawa. This candidate will not. We have to fight back against Ottawa and make sure that we put a target that's reasonable, realistic, and achievable.
I know you're keen on fighting. You want to fight with Ottawa. You want to fight with the media. You want to fight, frankly, with your former self. It's actually quite exhausting.
So you can see Smith really leaning into how she is the best person to be standing up to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, standing up to Ottawa. And then you have Notley taking those jabs at Smith's previous comments that have in the past got her into some trouble.
Okay, so Julia, three key topics tonight, affordability, healthcare, the economy. Is there one that stole the show?
Yeah, I would say definitely during the economy section, it was really interesting because that is an area that Albertans are thinking about. What does the oil and gas sector look moving forward? Now, you could see that Smith was really emphasizing Rachel Notley's 4 years when she was premier and taking jabs at her tax policies. Take a listen.
When you take a position of increasing business taxes, you're creating a lot of uncertainty in our sector. We now have more corporate income revenue than we have in our history, $6.4 billion. When you reduce taxes, you end up attracting jobs and investment and people. When you increase taxes, you chase it away.
And on the other hand, you have Notley stressing how Smith and some of the comments she's made in the past, they bring uncertainty when it comes to Alberta's economy.
I find it deeply ironic that Ms. Smith is talking about uncertainty and its impact on attracting investment. This is a person who, well, started by bringing in the Sovereignty Act, an act that her former finance minister very clearly said was going to chase away investment because it undermined the rule of law.
So a lot to digest from this packed 1 hour. Definitely a lot of opportunity for Albertans who may not know at this point who they're going to vote for, which way they may lean. And we'll definitely see the impacts of this in the coming days. And as we head closer and closer to Election Day, Albertans head to the polls on May 29th.
All right, thank you, Julia. Julia Wong in Edmonton. Now, the path to become premier could very well go through Calgary. Alberta's largest city holds about 30% of the province's seats. Many are up for grabs. Aaron Collins takes us to one of its key ridings.
Alberta's election heating up. This coffee shop part of the front line in Battleground Calgary.
I see you moving the needle in healthcare, so yeah. Well, that's actually why I'm running again.
Every vote critical to the incumbent United Conservative candidate here. He won this seat by just over 600 votes in 2019.
Calgary varsity was tight last time. It's likely going to be tight this time, fairly close.
Conservatives won 23 of 26 seats here last election.
Quite frankly, we have a track record, like growing economy, jobs, diversification.
And to win again, the UCP will need those Calgary seats again. The rival NDP need them too, setting up a political showdown in Cowtown.
Whichever party is going to win this election is going to need to win at least 18, 20 seats in this city to be able to form government.
Both parties have already spent a lot of time in the city kicking off their official campaigns here. They're promising to spend a lot of money here too. The UCP pledging more than $300 million to support a new pro hockey rink. The NDP offering up $200 million for a university campus in Calgary's core. Well, back in Calgary varsity, the NDP are on the move. This riding one they think they can pick up in the city.
Have you thought about where you might be leaning?
I'm pretty sure this household will be yours.
This doctor hoping to unseat the current health minister.
People really feel that they have a choice because there isn't a clear winner or loser, and so they can really vote for what their values are.
The campaign for Calgary is still too close to call. One thing that is more certain, a big win here will likely mean 4 years in power up the road in Edmonton. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
One other note on this, Alberta's Ethics Commissioner says Danielle Smith breached the Conflicts of Interest Act in relation to a case tied to COVID restrictions. A report states, speaking to an attorney general about a specific ongoing criminal case in the way that Premier Smith did on the call with Minister Shandro is not acceptable. That conversation came after a phone call between Smith and the accused. In it, he asked Smith for help. The commissioner said that interaction was inappropriate, but not a matter covered by the Conflicts of Interest Act. As to allegations by CBC News, citing an anonymous source, that the Premier's office emailed the Crown Prosecution Service about the case, the report could find no evidence that the event occurred or that any email exists. CBC says it stands by its reporting. Still in Alberta, new warnings tonight that the risk of more wildfires is on the rise yet again.
The situation can change quickly. An evacuation order could come at any time with little to no warning.
Right now, about 90 are burning across the province, but there's fear that number will grow with hot, dry conditions in the forecast and the potential for man-made fires over the long weekend. At the same time, heavy smoke is still blanketing most of Alberta and British Columbia. Well, they're still at the table, but the negotiation between WestJet and its pilots is almost at a runway. Pilots could be on strike tomorrow. Sam Sampson shows us the airline isn't waiting. It's already started canceling flights.
Connor Guillet is a details guy. For his trip to Kyrgyzstan, he prepped his wardrobe and gifts for local children. Then this morning, WestJet canceled the Toronto leg of his flight.
Really did think I had all my bases covered. I think I'm disappointed that it's such a large, wealthy organization, and it's the small customers who they rely on that are really feeling the brunt of this disruption.
WestJet canceled flights across Canada, even though contract talks with the pilots are still happening. A strike hasn't started. The company says it's preparing for upcoming job action. Customers can either get a refund or a new flight. But just ahead of the May-long weekend, it thrust tens of thousands into travel limbo. Muzamil Murad's family was supposed to meet him in Florida for a cruise. Their flight also canceled this morning. He forked out almost $2,000 for tickets with a different airline so his wife and kids could join him.
He's all excited for the trip, and then having to explain to him last night that Daddy can't talk to you because Daddy's on the phone talking to different airlines and credit card companies trying to figure out what's going on.
The pilots' union wants higher wages, closer to what some U.S. airlines offer. WestJet says meeting their demands would hurt the company's ability to offer lower fares. With no sign of things getting settled, some believe these canceled flights ahead of the strike deadline was a negotiation tactic.
What the airline has done here is played a very firm hand in this, and this could disrupt their travel plans. But going forward, this action and the decision by the airline could entail consumers not booking with this airline in future, thinking, okay, if this can happen now, it can happen in future, therefore we'll look to another carrier.
The pilots' union tells CBC News talks continue ahead of the 5 a.m. Eastern strike deadline. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Toronto.
Quebec's nursing regulatory body is facing some intense criticism tonight. In its last two licensing exams, more than half of the candidates failed. And a new report says part of the problem is the exam itself. Here's Sarah Levitt.
I feel kind of hopeless.
Giselle Rose Wagner, a nursing school graduate, has one last step before she can begin her practice, passing the licensing exam. Except she's failed 3 times and now wonders.
I kind of do want to try it again, but I also don't, because at this point, I'm kind of like, what's the point?
Wagner isn't the only one thinking of leaving the profession. Even as Quebec faces major staffing issues, hundreds of nursing students also failed. Now the province's Order of Nurses is under fire after an investigation found major problems with their exam. Before 2022, failure rates were between 4 and 37%. Then the governing body changed the exam and those rates went way up. More than half of the 5,000 nursing students who took the exam this past September and March failed.
The exam is not testing what it should be testing.
The commissioner of the province's professional orders, André Gariepi, found the questions were outdated.
Institutions should not go their own way, their own thinking, and be insensitive to the reality, first of the people involved, affected, and the health system that is in need of competent people.
He also found the nursing order had raised the passing grade from 50% to 55% without justification. Gariepi says it meant 500 of the 1,500 students who failed the exam in September should have passed. The province's health minister says Quebec can't afford to lose hundreds of potential nurses. Quebec's Order of Nurses told CBC News in a statement that changes are coming. Next year, the province will adopt the national assessment exam used across the rest of Canada. As for those who failed a third and usually final time, well, they'll be allowed to sit again. That is, if they still want to. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
Saskatchewan's Public Complaints Commission says 2 police officers failed to properly do their jobs in a case that ended in the death of a 13-month-old boy. And tonight, the chief of the Prince Albert Police Service announced he will retire. So last February, 2 Prince Albert officers responded to a domestic violence call made by the mother of baby Tanner Brass. The independent report found the officers did not check on the child who was inside the house with the father. Hours later, the toddler was found dead. The report describes a series of compounded failures and calls the actions of the officers a neglect of duty. The officers were suspended with pay last year. Canadian lawmakers are debating a proposed change to the Citizenship Act that would grant foreign adopted children the same rights as those born in Canada. This proposed change would reverse an unintended consequence of a 2009 reform. Kate McKenna spoke to one family caught by a rule not aimed at them.
That was our first day together in Zambia. We just got him and he never stopped smiling.
The day they met their son, Nathaniel, Kat Lantang and her partner, Graham Ball, say their lives changed forever. The Toronto couple spent years trying to adopt.
When Nathaniel came into our lives, it was a miracle.
They're excited to watch Nathaniel grow and flourish in Canada. But as he gets older, there will be one thing that sets him apart from his other Canadian friends.
There's a 2-tiered system, and he does not share the same rights and values as any other Canadian citizen, simply because he's adopted and was born in another country.
Unlike a Canadian-born person, if Nathaniel as an adult has children overseas, they won't automatically be Canadians. It's part of a 2009 reform to crack down on the number of people who hold Canadian passports who spend little or no time in the country. If you're born outside Canada and your kids are also born abroad, they don't automatically qualify for Canadian citizenship. The change was never meant to affect adopted kids, but it does.
It's identifying a target, but it's missing that target, and it's hitting other individuals who it never meant to deal with.
NDP Member of Parliament Jenny Kwan is working to expand the bill currently before committee. She wants to ensure citizens who have a meaningful connection to the country can pass on their citizenship, even if their children are born outside of Canada.
That has huge ramifications for people. And so I've talked to families who are impacted in that way, and they're desperate.
Everybody's very anxious. We're sort of biting our nails.
Lantang says she's pleading with MPs to support the change. It is still several steps away from becoming law, but Lantang says if it does, it'll change her son's life, as well as the lives of thousands of young Canadians. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
Thousands of police officers from across the country gathered to bid farewell to Ontario Provincial Police Sergeant Eric Mueller. His funeral held in Ottawa. Supporters paid respects as a procession wound its way towards a private ceremony. Among the speakers, Ontario Premier Doug Ford and the OPP Commissioner.
We need to ask ourselves if our police officers, the very ones we rely upon for our safety and security, are not safe, then who is?
Mueller was shot and killed a week ago, responding to a call in the small town of WestJet, Ontario. 2 other officers were injured in what police described as an ambush. Mueller is survived by his wife and 2 young children. 93-year-old Carol Smith is still recovering after she says the motorized wall bed, or Murphy bed as they're known, folded up while she was sleeping in it, nearly crushing her to death. The company that sold the bed cannot understand, it says, how it happened. Valeria Corey-Minocchio tells us the hunt is on for what went wrong.
My mother was sleeping on this side of the bed.
Caroline Hanrahan hasn't touched this Murphy bed in months. Her 93-year-old mother slept in it over the holidays. The morning of December 27th, Carol Smith says she heard the motor activate.
I could feel the bed starting to crunch me, and then I don't remember anything more.
The family says the bed's remote was on the other side of the room. When Caroline realized her mother was stuck, she tried to use it to bring the bed down, but it wasn't working.
Grabbed the top rung at the back of the bed underneath and started pulling on it and pushing it with my legs.
Carol was curled up at the head of the bed.
She was gray and she wasn't breathing.
Caroline and her daughter performed CPR, and Carol started to breathe again. She spent more than 2 weeks in hospital being treated for 2 broken ribs. Weeks later, she was diagnosed with a clavicle that separated from her shoulder.
It has just taken a lot of life out of me.
The family did not contact the company that sold them the bed. They reported the incident to Health Canada. An investigation is underway, but they want answers.
I've not gotten any feedback about what to do about the bed or about Carol.
I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else. I don't understand how the bed went up by itself.
Pierre Brunel owned Les Murales Montréal when the family bought the bed there about 3 years ago. He spoke to CBC on the company's behalf. It builds the wood frames around the beds and assembles them on location. The motors for this bed are manufactured in China and certified by a German company. The bed can't go up on its own, he says. Brunel says it takes 90 seconds to raise the bed completely. The buttons on the remote need to be pressed the whole time. He says any frequency interference with the remote would stop the bed. Or if either of the 2 motors powering the bed were defective, they would also turn off. He says the company doesn't doubt that the woman was injured, but says there's something missing. Brunel says when they heard of Smith's injuries, the company stopped selling the motorized model for several weeks and performed tests in the showroom. He also reached out to the manufacturer, who was concerned too. Health Canada says it can't discuss cases under investigation, but it says manufacturers have the responsibility to ensure their products are safe and comply with the Consumer Product Safety Act. In the meantime, a consumer rights organization in Quebec says it hasn't received any complaints about motorized Murphy beds. Valeria Corey-Minocchio, CBC News, Montreal.
India is facing a crushing heat, putting some people's livelihoods at risk.
The problem is that climate change is simultaneously increasing temperature and humidity.
The unique solutions to try to cool the air. The Liberals are changing the rules on bail, but the opposition says it's not enough.
Violent offender will have to serve their entire period in jail, not bail,
Rosie's here with that issue. And a cyclist is thankful to be alive after a bit of a wild encounter.
He turned and looked at me and he just instantly ran across the road.
We're back in 2. What a mess. In northern Italy, flooding is forcing thousands of people from their homes. Days of heavy rains have crumbled roadways, flooded homes, and led to more than 200 landslides. At least 13 people have died. Italian officials say that some parts of the country had received their average annual rainfall in just 36 hours. This weekend's Formula One race has also been canceled. And in India, it is the heat that's catastrophic, wreaking havoc across the country. As South Asia correspondent Salima Shivji tells us, climate watchers say it's going to get much worse.
Even in the early hours, it's painful under Delhi's fierce sun. Any relief is but temporary. From a stifling heat, at times impossible to bear. For those dependent on the money from their crops, there's no other way. It doesn't matter how hot it gets, this farmer says. My entire family has to be out here. The same struggle at this local market. There's no shade or shelter to save us from the heat, this vendor says, but we have to sell our vegetables.
It's flirting with 40 degrees here in Uttar Pradesh outside of Delhi, and that is a good day, a brief respite, with temperatures heading into the mid-40s. Experts say India is getting more days of extreme heat that are far more intense for sustained periods. Heat waves are expected to double, even triple, over the next few decades.
Last month, 13 people died at an outdoor event near Mumbai in a heat wave scientists say was made 30 times more likely because of climate change.
It is heat plus humidity that we need to be worried about. The problem is that climate change is simultaneously increasing temperature and humidity.
The additional threat is an economic one, lost working hours due to extreme heat. India is more vulnerable on that front than any other country in the world. And so there's a push to adapt. Small initiatives like at this government daycare center in India's south, one of Chennai's poorest areas. Temperature readings are a constant, monitoring the progress of this newly planted garden on the roof.
We are noticing around a 1 degree difference between the two across the day measurements. As the green patch increases, we look forward to the temperature difference being somewhere around 3 degrees.
The hope is those few degrees will make a big difference to help blunt the effects of a warming climate, one roof at a time. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Uttar Pradesh.
Well, it's Friday morning in Japan, which means the G7 summit is officially underway. CBC News has learned that much of today's focus will be on Ukraine and that Canada will announce new sanctions against dozens of individuals and entities linked to Russia. Those sanctions will target those providing military, technology, and others involved in human rights violations, including the transfer of Ukrainian children to Russia. Ashley Burke is traveling with the Prime Minister.
My friend, welcome to Japan.
The shadow of a past war hung over Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's first bilateral meeting at the G7.
Particularly touching because it's in your hometown, but also a place of tremendous significance as a warning to us all in a very difficult time in the world.
Trudeau sat down with Japan's Prime Minister, who lobbied to hold the 3-day summit in Hiroshima to send a powerful message. He wants a world without any nuclear weapons. Fumio Kishida said together with Trudeau, he wants to contribute to peace and stability in the region. Hiroshima, a historic city, was destroyed almost 80 years ago when the U.S. dropped the world's first atomic bomb, killing tens of thousands of people. Now Russia's president has threatened to unleash his own nuclear weapons on Ukraine.
We stand up for shared values, including supporting brave people in Ukraine.
Survivors of the atomic bombing are calling on G7 leaders to sign a pledge committing to complete denuclearization. This survivor says she wants G7 leaders to seriously acknowledge the inhumanity of nuclear weapons. They are weapons that can destroy mankind, she said.
Nuclear weapons is increasing again, and North Korea is developing and strengthening its nuclear arsenal. China is building up its strategic nuclear forces very quickly. Russia is suggesting possible use of nuclear weapons. That's really bad.
As the G7 gets underway, a key agenda item is continuing to support Ukraine. A government official said that Canada also wants to take a leadership role to try and help lower and middle income countries with a range of issues, including food and energy security. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Hiroshima.
And after the break, Rosie's here with that issue. Hello there.
Hi, Adrian. Tonight, we taped that issue before that Alberta debate, so we won't tackle that tonight. We'll get back to that critical election next week, but we are going to talk about the latest proposed changes to the bail system.
We're signaling to Crown prosecutors that a person should not be out on bail if they have a history of violence.
Do the changes go far enough, and how do they play into the politics of being tough on crime? Chantal, Andrew, and Althea join me to talk about that and more. Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's what's at issue this week. The government has tabled new legislation to tighten up the bail system, targeting repeat violent offenders and expanding the use of reverse onus for firearm and intimate partner offenses. It comes after pressure from the provinces and some high-profile violent crimes by offenders out on bail.
The goal of Bill C-48 is improving public safety. At the same time, we want to make sure that these law reforms do not make things worse for Indigenous people, Black people, and other vulnerable groups who we know are overrepresented in the criminal justice system.
Provinces and police associations seem generally satisfied with the proposed changes, but Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says it does not go far enough.
Violent offender, newly arrested for another serious violent offense, will have to serve their entire period in jail, not bail, and not early parole. That's common sense.
So is this the right response to the rise in violent crime incidents in Canada? How much is crime a wedge issue for the Liberals and the Conservatives? Let's bring in the panelists. Chantal Hébert, Althea Raj, Andrew Coyne. Good to see everybody. Chantal, I'll start with you. Obviously, crime is a wedge issue for both sides, but what did you make of both the proposal and then the Conservative response?
I'm not sure it's as much of a wedge issue as one of those issues where everyone is trying to up the other, right, rather than differentiate themselves. I thought that the proposal stemmed clearly from provincial pressure, irresistible provincial pressure on the Liberals, who are. It's a shield issue for them. Right. They're trying to protect that flank of their platform by becoming a bit tougher. As for the Conservative proposal, it is also true to form for the party, but I am not convinced that it would resist scrutiny on the constitutional side, not necessarily the entire proposal, but the section of the proposal where you're basically saying that someone who is not yet being convicted of anything would be in jail and denied bail. I'm not sure that would pass muster, and I am reminded that many of the tough on crime Conservative measures under Stephen Harper ended up being undone in the courts.
Yeah, and there were some constitutional types that weighed in after this announcement, Andrew, and said that very thing, that what the Conservatives proposed as a response would not hold up against the Charter. But I think there were also questions about what the Liberals were doing as well. Some people were having questions about whether their proposals would hold up as well.
Yeah, I think the Liberals are testing the limits of Charter scrutiny. Yeah. I think the Conservative proposal is clearly overboard. Look, there's a balance to be struck here between the rights of the individual and the protecting community safety. You don't have an absolute right to bail, but neither can you be absolutely prohibited bail. It depends on the circumstances. That's why we have case-by-case scrutiny of this. And what they've done in this bill is expanded the list of reverse onus crimes where you'd have to show cause why you should be given bail rather than the state showing why you should be denied it. That in itself is, as I say, is skating pretty close to the line. But to simply say nobody gets bail if you've had a prior record of violent offenses, you're simply throwing the presumption of innocence out the window. Mm-hmm. Look, 70% in Ontario, 70% of the people in jail right now are people on remand, people awaiting their trial, people who are serving time without having been convicted of any offense. So the notion that we're just going to simply expand that even beyond that, it just seems to me unconscionable.
Althea?
Well, both Andrew and Chantal are right. I mean, I think there was a great vulnerability on the Liberal side. Mothers are worried that their children are going to get stabbed and die taking public transit, whether in British Columbia or in Toronto. So they absolutely had to do something. Yes, the Police Association, yes, the Conservatives, yes, the provinces, but I think that, for the same reason that they went really hard on guns in the 2021 election, with that same group of kind of swing ridings, they had to show that they take this very seriously. What I find interesting, and Chantal alluded to it, is that, this is a repeat of the Harper era policies where the Conservatives sought to take judgment away from judges. This was going to be mandatory minimums. This was going to be, a hard black line drawn in the sand. And you're going to take away the judgment of judges who are supposed to kind of weigh this. And so you do have a stark difference in approach between the Liberals and the Conservatives. One thing that is kind of talked about but not talked about is what the Conservatives are really trying to say is that a liberal bill that was brought in about 3 years ago that basically asked judges to consider whether an accused was from a marginalized community that was overrepresented in prison, people from Indigenous background, Blacks, whether that should weigh into the calculation. The Conservatives are basically suggesting that it should not, but I actually don't think I've heard them say it should not, but they've pointed to that piece of legislation to say the problem lies here.
They have not. When asked that specific question, they have not answered it. So we're pretty unclear about what their position is on it. Chantal.
But let's be clear, everything bad that happens, including the snow that I saw outside my window yesterday in Montreal, is Justin Trudeau's fault. So I think that's the default position for the Conservative Party. I am also starting to wonder whether it would be appropriate to question whether a Conservative federal government would use the notwithstanding clause to push some of the legislation that it says it wants to put forward. Because if you're going to start proposing things that are at face, just looking at them, not constitutional and not charter-proof, then the next step is, so would you be willing to use the notwithstanding clause? And I think that's a question worth asking until there is a clear answer.
Well, they did vote in favor of a block motion that supported the province's use of the notwithstanding clause as it has been used. So they're clearly not opposed to it. I don't know if Chantal is right that they would use it in this case, but she's right. It's a question worth asking.
Yeah, what Poilievre has simply said is he's just declared it would be charter compliant, which is, I don't think you could just wave a wand and do that. I certainly wouldn't put it past this breed of Conservative that they are much less concerned with the blowback from invoking the notwithstanding clause. I think the Liberals are vulnerable on crime. Particularly it's down from what it was 30 years ago, but it's up from where it was 5 or 6 years ago. And it may be that with these tweaks and these changes, they've got themselves on side. By getting on side with the premiers, getting on side with the police chiefs, they may have given themselves enough cover.
Right, but it took all those things to get them there, I guess is the question, I'm asking. It took a bunch of violent incidents, police officers being killed, whether it was related to bail or not, and provinces saying, hey, we need some help here in order for them to recognize that what they put in place maybe wasn't working or that they needed to do something more. Chantal, yeah.
Okay, but I'll cut them a break for the fact that we emptied our downtown cores for 2.5 years on account of a pandemic. So it's not... Sure. We went from empty and staying home to everyone is back, and yes, more mental health issue and more violence. So it's not as if this has been building up under everyone's eyes for the past 3 years. It is a post-pandemic reality that everyone is adjusting to.
Okay, we're going to take a short break here, but we'll be back with another round of At Issue. Many Quebec politicians are taking a firm stance against a federal promise to increase immigration, saying it could harm the province. What's really going on here? That's next on The National. Welcome back to another round of At Issue. Immigration targets announced more than 6 months ago have become new political fodder. Quebec politicians have seized on reports suggesting Canada was aiming to increase its population to 100 million by the year 2100. That is not, in fact, the federal government's policy, but no matter. The National Assembly adopted a motion saying Ottawa's targets were incompatible with protecting the French language, sparking fears of diminishing power for the province. So what's to be made of Quebec's response, and what are the stakes federally? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Althea, I'll start with you here. This is not really about the federal government's targets. This is about a suggestion by a group that was put into the Quebec media landscape, and everyone in Quebec's hair sort of went on fire, and they felt they had to respond to it.
Yes and no. 2 weeks ago, Le Journal de Montréal, which is like the popular tabloid in Quebec, splashed on this cover a fleur de lis, or the symbol of Quebec, in a trap. And it said, Quebec trapped in a Canada of 100 million. And then they had columnists weighing in. Justin Trudeau is more conniving than we thought. We will be assimilated. 2 plans, no debate, catastrophe. When something percolates in the Journal de Montréal at a certain level, you realize, okay, everybody's talking about this. But it has continued in the pages of the newspaper. So it's like a media environment feeding this frenzy that is like immigrants are a threat to Quebecers. And I will say 2 things. One, they are right that if there are more immigrants that do not speak French, then the French language, the use of the French language in Quebec will diminish, and that could be a problem. And if there are fewer immigrants accepted in Quebec, then Quebec's political weight will obviously diminish vis-a-vis the rest of the country. So the argument is not wrong, but the way that it is presented, it is kind of like reminiscing of the dialogue that we had in the provincial election. At the core of it, it is this idea that should we be accepting 500,000 immigrants in the next few years?
But fundamentally, Chantal, the concerns or the political debate that has been started is not founded in fact. It is not founded in liberal immigration policy. So what is going on here? Like, why are people engaging in this as though it's real and that there is a real need for fear in some way?
So do you want the long or the short version?
It's TV, the shorter one.
So I'll go for medium.
Yeah,
it
medium.
will not be as long as Althea is my way of saying this. It would help to mention that Québécois is owned by Pierre-Carl Péladeau, who used to be the leader of the Parti québécois. Right. And this is published, and this campaign is taking place at a time where the Parti québécois is showing signs of life, as in after the Quebec government reneged on a major transit promise, the polls showed that the party that benefited, even if it opposed that transit project, was the Parti québécois. Right. So there is a context here of trying to rekindle the sovereigntist flame. Okay. The nice coincidence was that François Legault had a weekend meeting of his party, and he desperately needed to change the channel from that broken promise. So, of course, he seized on the immigration issue. He always does whenever he is in trouble on any other issue. That being said, the real dilemma in Quebec is not the federal targets for immigration. Although, if you want to make a case for sovereignty, you can say if we stay in Canada, we'll have no influence anymore because immigration in the rest of the country will increase the population. It is that we are facing labor shortages, an aging population, a need for more immigrants who absolutely must be able to work in French. Yeah. It is of no use to Quebecers who don't live on the island of Montreal that we can find nurses who can't speak French. And that's a dilemma that the Quebec government, a very practical one. And so it's a much more complex issue than a motion in the House of Commons. Yeah. As for the Conservatives, let me cut them a break. I don't believe that they are planning to run in Quebec on an anti-immigration platform. And why I don't believe that is that by doing so, they will only be increasing the vote of the Bloc Québécois.
Andrew.
Even if it were Liberal policy to increase our population to 100 million by 2100, Justin Trudeau is not going to be Prime Minister 77 years from now. What the immigration,
we can guarantee that.
What level of population we'll have in 2100 will be determined by policies that are decided every year in the 77 years between now and then. So let's leave that to one side.
Yes, please.
Even the immigration levels that we have now, we're headed towards 500,000 federally. To keep pace with that would require 100,000 into Quebec. The position of the Quebec Solidaire Party is 80,000. So the difference between 80,000 and 100,000, I don't think over a few years or even over 77 years, I don't think spells the death of Quebec versus the life of Quebec. So the stakes in this are being vastly exaggerated.
Sure.
Quebec's share of the overall population of the country has gone down from 29% in the 1940s to 22% today. Has its influence and throw weight in the Confederation gone down, or has it gone up since then? It's gone up. It's much more vital and important in our federal politics. And it's as much in Quebec's interest as it is in Canada's interest as a whole to have a large, dynamic, growing, vital population. It's in Quebec is in interest to have higher population levels and higher immigration levels as much as Canada's. The Francization question of making sure those immigrants are learning French, that's a question of setting priorities as a government. You devote the resources to it. You'll have more resources if you have more people. Then you can do it. Just make a decision to do it, and this is a complete false flag, phony issue.
So just quickly, all three of you, what does the debate, though, do for the federal Liberals who need Quebec, obviously, to win another election, and who might be wearing more of this than they need? We'll start with Chantal, then Althea.
Justin Trudeau has been on the wrong side of the Journal de Montréal and the Quebec government on the Bill 21 and secularism. He has been on the wrong side of François Legault on immigration for the past two elections.
Yep.
I don't think that this is the weapon that will take down the Liberals in Quebec. I think the biggest threat to the Liberals in Quebec is a weak Conservative Party. Why do I say that? Because when the Conservatives are weak, the Bloc is stronger.
Yeah.
And when the Bloc is stronger, it takes Liberals out of play. Yeah. But this issue is not going to be the issue that sends Justin Trudeau packing in Quebec.
Quickly, Althea.
I agree with Chantal. I don't think this is the issue that's going to hurt the Liberals in Quebec. They've managed to kind of insulate themselves from the debate on Bill 21, for example. I think the official languages bill takes a little bit of sting out of this. So setting that aside, I think, though, that what is more interesting to me about this whole debate is the Conservative positioning, because I think that if English Canada awakens to the things that the Conservatives are saying in French, like in the previous panel, you talked about the notwithstanding clause, the block motion on that earlier this year in the House of Commons, where every single Conservative MP in the chamber voted to say that they are fine with how the provinces have used the notwithstanding clause. That's Bill 21. That's Bill 96. And a lot of Conservative MPs publicly say, no, we are opposed to Bill 21. Then how can you vote in favor of it in the House of Commons? That's where the problem lies.
Andrew, quickly.
Just to pick up on Althea's point about the Conservatives, we're about to cross a threshold pretty soon in this country where 50% of the population will either be foreign-born or the children of foreign-born. A lot of them living in those suburbs in Ontario and Quebec, particularly in Ontario, where the Conservatives need to make yards, need to win seats. There is no percentage for them in being either the reality or the perception of being an anti-immigration party.
Okay, got to leave it there. I got to leave it there. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. We'll see you next week. Now I'll send things back to Adrian in Toronto.
All right, thanks, Rosie. Next, a frightening collision.
And then I just remember crashing like right behind his shoulder blade. I just went flying.
Hard to believe, but a cyclist slams into a bear, but stays alive in our moment. So this very fit, very calm-looking soul is Kevin Milner. He was out for a nice evening bike ride in North Vancouver, as you do, when he ran into this guy coming around the corner. In the blink of an eye, those two collided. Milner was T-boned by the bear. He was sent flying. So pretty seriously injured, but spirit intact. He is now recovering and plans to get back on that bike. His terrifying ordeal is our moment.
I basically vaulted over top of him. I was riding down the Seymour Demonstration Forest Road. I was going around a corner, and it Immediately to my left, I noticed there was a bear there. I had a split-second decision to either slam on the brakes and stop right next to him, or I could just, you know, keep riding for like even like a second or two, and I'd already passed him, right? He turned and looked at me, and he just instantly ran across the road, just directly across the middle of the road. And then I just remember crashing like right behind his shoulder blade, just hitting him dead center. I just went flying, and I ended up on the ground. And I looked, and the bear was like just down the way, about 50 or 60 feet maybe away. So I've got a pretty big fracture in my scapula, which is like in the back here. And then they said I had a cardiac contusion, which is basically like a bruised heart muscle. My whole abdomen, everything's swollen. Like I got like a Kim Kardashian booty going on, but just on one side. Helmet broke like it should have and protected me really well. Fantastic helmet. Highly recommend this helmet.
Okay, ouch. He's in a lot of pain there. Breaking his back. The bear, I know you're wondering, the bear is just fine, by the way. Big shout out to a man named Sam, who happened to be there with his e-bike, gave it to Kevin, who somehow got himself on the e-bike and then cycled 7 kilometers to the edge of the forest. That is a national for May the 18th. Thank you for being with us. Have a good night.